These young soldiers joined the uprising against Muammar Gaddafi on the first day. Now they've enlisted in the rebel force and they say they're ready to march on Tripoli.
We don't want money or cars or anything. We want to protect the country and its people.
A lot of young people are sacrificing themselves. They want to go to the West. We have old men and women who will go to the West to liberate it.
So there's no shortage of volunteers, no shortage of patriotism and revolutionary zeal. But as to exactly when, how, and even if they intend to advance on the capital, that's another question.
The anti-Gaddafi forces say their first task is to defend the east of the country, what they call Free Libya. Taking the fight to the capital would be the next step.
We have a force that can protect Benghazi. The force may use heavy trucks to transport tanks to go to Tripoli and pass through Sirte on the way because it still supports the regime. The power we have is enough. The ammunition, supplies and fuel are also enough. We don't have a problem.
But a tour of this airfield paints a less optimistic picture of what the rebels have at their disposal. Rusting Soviet-era fighter planes that haven't left the tarmac in years. All part of Gaddafi's strategy to prevent the army from ever threatening his rule.
The army was dismantled years ago. The regime is concentrating only on security units.
The victory they're celebrating is incomplete as long as Muammar Gaddafi remains in control of cities in the west. And most Libyans fear he will not be defeated without more bloodshed. Jackie Rowland, Al Jazeera in eastern Libya.
So as the fighting goes on inside Libya, governments are continuing to evacuate their people from the country. There were tears of relief from this Pakistani man as he arrived home at Lahore airport. He was among the 170 evacuated on a specially chartered flight. In New Delhi, another 266 Indians have arrived home on a special Air India flight. Around 18,000 Indians work in Libya. And 150 more migrant workers arrived home in the Kenyan capital. That was on Monday. Kenya says the flight was delayed by 3 days because Egypt refused to give clearance, citing safety concerns. And Nigerians evacuated from Libya are accusing the Gaddafi regime of atrocities against them. Nearly 1,000 have been flown home in the past 2 days, while another 1,000 are awaiting rescue.
I have so many friends in Libya. They told me that they cannot speak because Gaddafi has killed their cousins and uncles. He destroyed them all.
I thank God because I'm free today. And I'm not going back to any part, any Arab world. I will never travel to any Arab world again.
Well, condemnation from outside Libya is mounting. Foreign ministers are in Geneva for a UN Human Rights Council meeting. They've agreed unanimously on action against Gaddafi.
The international community is speaking with one voice, and our message is unmistakable. These violations of universal rights are unacceptable and will not be tolerated.
We're trying to respond in real time to the crisis and, of course, to avoid the civil war that we fear, and making contingency plans to respond to the potential flow of refugees to neighbouring and to European countries.
Well, pressure is also coming from Washington. The U.S. has frozen $30 billion in Libyan government assets, and it's moving its naval and air forces closer to Libya to help enforce any future no-fly zone. John Terrett reports.
After 2 weeks of beating around the bush, the White House came out punching over Libya on Monday. Spokesman Jay Carney says Gaddafi's lost all legitimacy in the eyes of his people and the world and must go.
He is no longer in a position to credibly lead his nation. And he is, in the meantime, inflicting horrific violence on the people he claims to serve and the people he claims love him.
Earlier, President Obama met the UN chief at the White House. On a visit to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, Ban Ki-moon drew parallels between Libya and the past.
Once again, we are being tested. In Libya, a regime that has lost legitimacy has declared war on its own people. It's up to us, the community of nations, to stand against this crime.
The US ambassador to the UN was less diplomatic about Colonel Gaddafi's latest statements on TV.
It sounds just frankly delusional. And when he can laugh in talking to American and international journalists while he is slaughtering his own people, it only underscores how unfit he is to lead and how disconnected he is from reality.
To enforce sanctions against Libya, the Pentagon is repositioning forces near the North Africa coast as the US and its allies consider options surrounding a possible no-fly zone. The Pentagon doesn't name the assets being redeployed, but they're thought to be the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise and the amphibious assault ship USS Kearsarge, plus the command vessel USS Mount Whitney. Also Monday, the US Treasury froze $30 billion of financial assets controlled by Colonel Gaddafi and his family, held in US banks. The move was described by the White House as the largest single financial freeze in US history. John Terrett, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Some other news now, and the latest population census in India is trying to put an accurate figure on the massive number of homeless people in the country. But as Prana Suri reports, critics say the survey has no chance of recording the real number of street people.
This is how India is trying to identify its homeless. Late into the night, government employees quiz this girl about what she does, who's in her family, and which God she believes in. Once they tick all the boxes, the information will then be used to assess her most pressing needs. It's an ambitious task, and it's happening as the country's census comes to a close. We've kept the homeless on the last day as we don't want to replicate data. They frequently move, so we wanted an accurate figure. Hari's lived his entire life on the streets of New Delhi and sells balloons for a living. He's been asked these questions many times in the past, but has life changed for him?
They've come here before, but what's the point? I still can't send my kids to school or get a decent job.
Nobody really knows how many homeless there are in India. Figures are sketchy and unreliable. And with no identification papers, children can't go to schools, and families can't claim welfare benefits. The point of this exercise is to include every homeless person in this country, and government officials are conducting simultaneous exercises all across India. And the time that they have to complete this is literally 2 days. So, not everyone's been counted. Across the city in a different area, this activist says officials have not counted large numbers of people.
This is a total mockery of a statutory provision. Census gives you the real figures, and we treat census data as sacrosanct. That what realities emerge, we take it. We have learned from census data as such. People will be deprived of their basic rights, basic entitlements.
As the rest of India races ahead on the road to modernity, there's a real danger the flaws in this exercise may leave behind some of its most vulnerable. Prana Suri, Al Jazeera, New Delhi.
Well, the unrest in North Africa and the Middle East appears to be having a ripple effect in Zimbabwe. Activists meeting to discuss protests in North Africa are being arrested in Harare. We'll have their story. That's in a few moments.